residents, any kid that goes into that for an exam gets a full body exam. You got a bump on your head, and he's checking your testicles and your anus too as well, inches away from his face. He's rubbing you to the point of masturbation. So we were saying before, there's no way that people could not be aware of this inappropriate behavior, right?
Well, getting back to that, and I think we had that right before the commercial break, but first of all, the actual facility. In the sport of wrestling, it's obviously hands-on. I got to show you the move. Also, your assistant coaches are some of the high-level guys trying to make the Olympic team, so they're training every day. So they get paid to basically train. So any assistant coach is pretty much still competing in the sport of wrestling, just not at the college level. They've graduated and they're at the Olympic level. So every day they're competing with us and showing us and trying to make us better. And they're coming down and getting the same treatment because they're showering the same way we are. So they're in there with these creeps all over, seeing the sexual deviancy. Also, you would have guys complaining all the time. For instance, as I'm getting dressed, a guy would probably, we would get dressed. We would be, hey, do you want to go grab a bite to eat? And the guy would say, hey, I got to go see Doc Strauss. A guy would say, hey, watch your testicles, or, watch your nuts, so to speak, is because they knew what was going to go happen to that dude. It was an open conversation to watch yourself. Now, you got to also remember, Dr. Strauss was given a locker in every locker room. So when I have to check in at the start, I got to go see an equipment manager. He gives me my locker number. He gives me my lock. I go in. Dr. Strauss had a locker in every locker room. Dr. Strauss would hurry up with exams so he could come into the locker room, get naked, shower with us, watch us, excessively lather himself to us. And then he would come back into that same locker room, and then what I call patting off. He would take his towel and pat off. I could come in after Doc Strauss into the locker room, and he's there patting, and I would be fully dressed, out of the locker room, going to get something to eat, and Doc is just still standing in the corner, back to his locker, watching everybody, still patting and drying off. You would come to the locker room sometimes, and Doc Strauss would be reading, let's say, the Ohio State Lantern or the New York Times, fully naked, sitting there waiting for guys to come in. And you got to remember, his locker is several lockers, maybe 3 or 4, from the entire coaching staff of the wrestling team. So they have to see, when I say it's impossible, they're seeing the same things we do. This guy is in there every day. And you have to remember, Doc Strauss, like I told you, the coaches are actually working out with us. The coaches are sweaty from the sport of wrestling. Doc Strauss isn't working out with us. Doc Strauss just showed up to take a shower with us.
And he would take several showers a day.
Oh, yeah. We are now getting reports from other sports like gymnastics and swimming and all these other guys that said he would show up and take showers with us. Hockey, he would show up when they're taking showers because practice times are all at different times set by the coaches. So Doc Strauss had to be the cleanest man in Ohio. He's probably taken 5 or 6 showers. And this is all after the fact. We didn't have this knowledge as wrestlers. We just thought it was us. But now, once this case comes out and we're sharing with everybody else, I did not know he had a locker in every sports locker room.
How could you have a man that is so obviously a sexual predator and the college do nothing about it? What was their motivation to let him get away with this?
Well, we think some of the motivation, number one, Doc Strauss was a very good doctor, meaning take out all the sexual stuff. He could heal you pretty quickly, always would get you back as quickly as you could. That was number one. Number two, he was well respected in a lot of different areas. I think he was respected in the Olympic sports. He was nationally recognized in those areas. So he would make himself go in there. And I think a lot of times he gave countless hours to the university and didn't expect payment. Like, he would show up, he would do trips with the teams. He would do this. Some of this he's not really getting, high dollars for, so they tolerate it. And I think the biggest thing that we brought forward, and the biggest reason, is because Doc Strauss was one of the foremost experts in anabolic steroids during the steroid era. It makes He's been countlessly. He has academic, and you can go through and pull up his academic, and we gave some of them. I don't know if these are all his. In our complaint, we give some of his writings, his academic writings, as to anabolic steroids.
It's very well documented. It's very well documented, the articles he wrote and the studies he did on anabolic steroids. Now, let me ask you this. Wouldn't it be enough of a scandal that if Representative Jim Jordon was aware that there was rampant steroid use going on under his assistant coaching? Isn't that enough? Forget the sexual stuff. Isn't that big enough of a scandal?
Yeah, but if during that time and even today, Ohio State don't even acknowledge that was going on.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So you got to have a scandal, somebody's got to have credibility. We've given this. I know there's been countless interviews that have been given where guys have brought this up. It's just not me being their attorney. Guys have told other reporters who have totally not done anything as far as reporting this. So we're talking Ohio State University, that is one of the biggest top 3 attended universities, probably the top athletic budget or one of the top 5 athletic budgets in the entire country. So when you go give reports to local media or other people, they just don't report it.
Well, we're going to have you come back as many times as you want. Yeah, we're going to have you come back as many times as you want, and I'm going to interview as many of these young men as you can find me, okay? Let me ask you this, because we're starting to run out of time. What about the cover-up? There was even a public relations firm that was brought in to tamper with witnesses.
Yes. They're in our complaint, and people can read this. Basically, when this hits, Jim Jordon is top 3. Looks like his name's probably going to be for the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives at the time. And this story hits. And I think in May, sometime Jim Jordon just, says, hey, I didn't know anything about sexual abuse. Well, they get one of the whistleblower back in, and he says he absolutely knew about it because, like I just explained, it's impossible to know that this stuff is not going on. Guys talk about it all the time. At that point in time, Jim's kind of, it's well documented, he hired a PR firm that is starting to call guys and say, hey, can you basically tell that Jim Jordon didn't know about this? There's no way Jim would know. And they're, trying to get wrestlers. So this totally divided the wrestling community because you have to either stick up for your former assistant coach and say he didn't know, or you have to tell the truth about sexual abuse, anabolic steroids, and everything that happened at the university you love. That's what they did to guys. They put them in 2 camps. So this PR firm goes around and it tries to set up people to say and give statements that says Jim Jordon didn't know and pressured guys to give those statements. So we don't know the extent truly of how bad Doc Strauss's sexual abuse is because we have guys trying to stick up for their assistant coach, a guy that they love. And that's where it's been totally divided in the wrestling community.
Yeah, the relationship
now, also
with
the university.
Yeah, the relationship with your coaches is
also,
very. Yeah.
Oh, it's destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly, it's destroyed. So guys that brought us into the university to tell us to stick up for the weak, or that would always say have a voice. I mean, these are the lessons that our head coach Russ Hellickson and Jim Jordon. Jim Jordon to me personally, was my icon. I mean, he was an icon to me. He was my idol growing up as a wrestler. He was one of the toughest guys in our country in the sport of wrestling. So many stories about Jim as an assistant coach could destroy the entire lineup of the Ohio State wrestling team because that's how good Jim Jordon was. He was one of our top guys. He was like 1 or 2, depending on the day, of our Olympians. So Jim Jordon, to me, is a total icon of the sport. He was my idol growing up. Jim Jordon recruited me. Ultimately, I left and went to Hofstra University, like I had told earlier in the show, and came back. When I got back, Jim Jordon had left to be a state rep. I live in Jim Jordon's district. I've supported Jim Jordon. I can't remember. This year might be the first time I'm not going to vote for Jim Jordon. I've always voted for Jim Jordon. I've always supported him. My families went to fundraisers. I loved Jim Jordon. But Jim Jordon is totally not telling the truth about what happened at The Ohio State University.
And Rocky, you told me
simple.
You told me in our conversation earlier this week that you believe that Jim Jordon actually confronted Dr. Strauss on behalf of the wrestlers.
Yes. If you look at our wrestlers and our complaint, if you're a Jim Jordon fan and you read that, there's not going to be anything in there that's going to tell you, well, Jim Jordon participated in the sexual abuse. In fact, it's the opposite, because what we are saying is Jim Jordon is lying about it happening, but Jim Jordon was part of conversations. In fact, if you read through the complaint under Dinyasha Yetz, and this has been widely reported in media, and this is how it even started, Dinyasha was a transfer just like me. Dinyasha went, got a physical from Strauss, and totally went off the hinges. He's a very passionate guy and was going off the hinges on what the heck just happened. He marches into the locker room, and there's 5 or 6 guys that have all corroborated his story that he is going off the hinges in the locker room. At that point in time, Jim Jordon and head coach Russ Hellickson say, we're going to get this sorted out right now because this is so egregious. They take the athlete to Doc Strauss's office, okay? So Doc Strauss would have been meeting with this athlete and giving him a physical in his private office outside the training room. You know, it's connected to the training room, but it's a private closed door. They all three, the athlete, Jordon, Hellickson, as the head coach, all go into the Doc's office. It gets so heated. At some point in time, they have to ask the athlete to leave the room. So the athlete then leaves the room, and he's standing outside the door as head coach Russ Hellickson and Jim Jordon is giving that doctor the business about being too hands-on with the athletes. What are you doing? At that point in time, after that gets finished, at that point in time, they come outside, grab the athlete and say, hey, that's never going to happen to you again, buddy. We got it straightened out. And they leave. So Jim Jordon, if the truth be told, actually confronted the doctor in the presence of the athlete to try to stick up for him for being too hands-on or, you know, manipulating. And I think he gave him a digital rectal exam and manipulating him during that exam.
But Mr. Ratliff, no, Jim Jordon, no, his locker was right next to Dr. Strauss's locker in the locker room?
It's either next to, but it might be two, you know, lockers go right in order, one right after another, just like any locker room.
Nearby.
It would have been in the vicinity of 3 or 4 away, maybe.
And Jim Jordon would spend a lot of time in the sauna where Dr. Strauss was in there naked.
Oh yeah.
Lounging.
Plenty of my clients have talked about that. Jim Jordon was training at the time. Jim Jordon was one of the best athletes in our country at the time in the sport of wrestling. He would have been using those facilities to lose weight and use it, and a lot of guys use saunas in the sport of wrestling for therapeutic, you know, to get in there, shed a few pounds, obviously for weight loss, but also therapy as far as it just feels good on your body, you know,
Sure.
if you use the sauna. So he would be in there. Jim Jordon even gave an award, which was called King of the Sauna, to an athlete, the guy that would be in the sauna, you know, basically the most, that would talk the most trash in the sauna. Guys would, jab at each other and talk crap when they were in the sauna.
Sure.
And Jim Jordon actually gave an award called King of the Sauna.
Okay.
So, he was in there constantly.
Let me ask you this, too, because we're running out of time. There's a Jeffrey Epstein, Les Wexner, Abigail Wexner connection to all this, too, as well. Can you brief us on that?
Yeah, we had, I think it was in December of 19, a group of my guys got together and said, basically they thought it was unfair because Abigail Wexner sits on the board of the Ohio State trustees. So my guys basically said this is just unfair that she is deciding our fate, yet she's part of a lawsuit that has an individual that was sexually assaulted at her property or the Wexner property by Mr. Epstein. So we asked them to look into that, like how can she sit in judgment of us in this case if she's got her own sexual assault problems going on. So we asked them to look into both Les and Abigail Wexner for the ties to Jeffrey Epstein and this lady's story. As sexual survivors, she's out fighting her own fight, so we asked them to step forward, the university and these different agencies, to ask for that. Now, the university at some point in time did find that Jeffrey Epstein